So here we are, sauntering along. What's this character doing? What's he doing? Oh, I think he's filming a lift. Who is it? Strange looking man.
Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. This time round we're looking at an unusual car that we've never had in before. I have never had in a workshop of mine that I've had for the last 40 years, and that is the DeLorean. We've been able to make this video with the kind permission of the owner. He did say because they have been maligned, obviously I'll explain about that later. I think time has been more kind to the DeLorean than it was at first launch, but because I'm sort of instructed not to say anything too negative about the car and the way it came about, we'll leave it at that. So that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Sorry, no. We'll start again. Hello, and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Here we have the DeLorean, which, yes, it's had bad press in the past. It was mired in conspiracy and confidence tricks and government money being extorted for governments. It was like a James Bond story for real, the story of John DeLorean in the late 70s and early 80s. But surely a car like this, I'm going to just put it out there, surely it has to be celebrated because so many cars were brought into this world, particularly at the high end, the sort of rarefied end, and they only made around about 9,000 of these, which is tiny by production car standards, really. Surely any make and model of car has to be celebrated because a lot of them were really mired in ego and dodgy dealing and conning people out of things and under-delivering and over-promising. And I mean, the car industry in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s was full of things like that. So I think it's actually really, I've found this car of great interest because it's off beam, it's out there, there are so many stories surrounding this car. We know that it was John DeLorean's dream to make it really out there technology-wise. It was going to be a high-tech car. I mean, there are parts of cars that have been covered in stainless steel before. I'm thinking of the Cadillac Eldorado Brougham in the 1958. I'm thinking of the Maserati Bora, stunning car, but no car body, and they were all fearsomely expensive. The Cadillac Eldorado Brougham was frighteningly expensive. So was the Maserati Bora, and for them to make the whole body is made out of 304 grade thin stainless steel sheet. This is what stainless steel exhausts are made out of, T304. And it was very adventurous to make a whole car out of this brushed stainless steel. And in one fell swoop, they made it very, very distinctive. You look at this, you know it's a DeLorean. It's unmistakable. And they tried, as I say, various ways of building technology into this car. Gull-wing doors are always a challenge. Engineering-wise on cars, and that's why so few of them have actually been built with them. There's a huge weight-bearing area in the roof here, right next to the windscreen, and if this moves around too much and isn't solidly supported, you can crack the windscreen. The obvious first thing. There's just that you've got to have a way of supporting the doors to keep them up, and one example of the technology is that DeLorean went to General Dynamics, the people who made military aircraft in the US, and they incorporated a cryogenically created cold processed torsion bar in the roof here. Mercedes-Benz used in the 1950s, used two huge spring-loaded struts to get round the problem. It's all sorts of things like this. And they tried to be high-tech. Eventually what DeLorean did when some of the more interesting and adventurous technology sort of things ended up being a cul-de-sac, he went to Colin Chapman And Colin Chapman was also a colourful individual. He really was. He made some great racing cars, but which won, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, he'd won 7 Constructors' World Championships with Lotus. Enzo Ferrari he resented Colin Chapman and Lotus. He called him a garagista because out of these tiny workshops in Hethel in Norfolk, not like Enzo Ferrari's huge ownership of most of Maranello, Colin Chapman made world beaters. It was, you know, he kept trumping Enzo Ferrari, and that didn't go down very well at all. So John DeLorean struck up an interesting relationship with Colin Chapman, and that ended very mysteriously indeed. Colin Chapman, around about 1980, got involved with John DeLorean. They re-engineered the car. The chassis is a backbone chassis running along the middle of the car, which sort of fans out at the front and the back with Y-shaped sections. Very much like the Lotus Esprit. The body was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Italian stylist, who also happened to have styled the Lotus Esprit. So there were some real connections there, and that was great because Colin Chapman, apart from designing cars that were so light that the rear suspension arm broke as they drove over the finishing line in races, he was a brilliant engineer. So that got incorporated into the car. The next dilemma was the power plant, the engine. They tried various options, the Ford Cologne V6, which was not a nice engine, actually. They looked at various power plants which were around in the 70s. Again, an interesting time in terms of engine design, because after the heady days of the 1960s, when V8 engines were very much a la mode. They were everywhere, V8 engines, particularly in the US. What manufacturers scrambled to do, like Citroën with the SM, they took the Maserati 90-degree V8, shoehorned it down to a V6, which ran roughly because V6s aren't supposed to work at 90 degrees. It's an adaptation from the 90-degree V8, and it brings all sorts of odd firing orders and strange things like that. And it was the same story with the engine that got used in this, ultimately, the PRV V6, joint venture between Peugeot, Renault and Volvo, an all-alloy V6. But again, it was a V8 with 2 cylinders chopped off, because in the early 70s, in the oil crisis, the wonderful days of the 60s had gone, and manufacturers were scrambling to find a more economical, cheaper to produce, more compact V6, lighter, and Peugeot, Renault, Volvo joint venture came up with the PRV V6, which again was, as I say, it was taken from a V8. It was a 90-degree V6, so it was already out of balance as a V6 taken from a V8, and so it was always a compromise, the PRV V6. It eventually improved in the 1980s, I think 1983, when Renault brought it out in a car which I quietly quite like, actually. I wouldn't fall over myself to have one, but I always liked the 25, the Renault 25. I thought it was a great car with that wonderful dashboard. It looks like a grandstand sat in front of you while you're driving. Amazing bit of kit. They brought out a V6 turbo of that, and what they did was alter the crankshaft, the big end bearing relationships to each other in the crankshaft, and actually turned it a 90-degree 6 through providing 15 and 30 degree apart journals. They managed to convert that into a smooth and good V6. Yeah, I remember having to do work on these engines, and they were a challenging engine, the PRV V6. If you didn't change the oil on them regularly, the top end clogged up with black sludge, which was quite prevalent in the 1980s if you didn't change the engine oil and filter with good quality oil. But we've done a lot of work on this car. It's a fabulously restored car. It's in beautiful condition. The engine is the PRV V6 with Bosch Cagetronic injection. The car has come in it's been restored, but it wants a a final flourish, the cream on top of the cake, if you like. So we've done that. We've had a journey with the Cagetronic injection. The car wasn't running at all well when it came in. I mean, they're lumpy anyway, the V6s, for the reasons I've explained, but this was not happy. It was running on sort of properly on 4.5 cylinders. Corey has done a lot of work on the injection system on this car. Right, we're at the business end here, Corey, and just tell me, what have we found? I'm using the royal we here, of course.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, the car's been in for quite a lot of work because it's been stood for a couple of years since its previous restoration, but it wasn't running on all 6 cylinders when I took it out for a drive on the road. It was only running on 5, really. So having checked over the ignition system, we also looked at the spark plugs, and we saw, didn't we, that there were different colours, different mixtures going on, which you would not expect to see on a K-Jet system. No. It should all be the same.
Yep. So
with the injectors being so easy to pull out and access, I thought it made sense to just rig it up in such a way that we can operate the fuel flap, the metering head here,
right,
and see what fuel's coming out of the injectors.
Yes.
One of them wasn't putting out any fuel whatsoever, which would explain why we've dropped a cylinder.
Okay. So, I mean, normally this presupposes that there's good compression on every cylinder, etc., etc.
Yeah.
That there isn't a mechanical fault with the engine as such.
No.
But as you you say that the throttle itself is under there, the butterfly.
Yeah.
And then as the engine sucks in air, as the throttle is opened, that flap moves.
Yep.
And you get that lovely high frequency ultrasonic or semi-ultrasonic noise.
Yep.
Which is the injectors working. So it's in that respect, it's a simple system. This flap, there's a pivot there, and then you have a plunger in there which opens as it slides up and administers fuel.
Yep.
In constant, it's not sequential.
No.
It's constant. Right, so can we just to show what it should look like,
Yep.
I presume this is one of these is a
Yeah,
good injector.
all these seem to be putting out fuel, so let's just try that one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There we go, lovely mist of fuel. You got that? Just try it
Turn
again.
the cup a little bit.
Beautiful. It's vaporized even as it comes out of the injector almost.
Yep, yep.
And that then gets sucked in by the cylinder and converts into a surprisingly pre-prepared charge, although the injection is constant, and for some of the time it's sat round in the inlet manifold before the cylinder sucks it in. It actually works, which is one of the amazing discoveries about that Bosch made with this Cagetronic system. It doesn't have to be sequential, or it didn't at the time.
No.
Things are obviously different now. Emissions are ratcheted up, and so is performance and fuel economy. But that's great. And did you say one of these wasn't working?
Yeah, that one in the back corner there, I think, is the one that isn't working whatsoever. So I push.
Just
just
give it a wee.
You ready?
Yeah. Oh, look at that.
Nothing at all.
Absolutely nothing.
Whereas the others are pouring out fuel, which is great.
Yes. Sounds like a particularly sick set of bagpipes at the moment.
Never thought of it that way, but
neither did I. But it's just a light bulb moment. What can I say? Okay, that's great. So we've got a set of injectors here.
We have. Yep.
We're going to put those in.
Yep.
Again, using the royal we.
Yes.
You are going to put a set of injectors in.
Yep.
Let's see if we can get this. I mean, they're not the smoothest of running engines anyway, because it is a 90-degree V6.
Okay.
And V6s aren't happy with 90-degree intervals. But anyway, we can make it work as well as it should do. Great bit of diagnosis.
Thank you.
And let's see how we get on with the fresh injectors. So we've stripped a lot of the fuel system down. We've overhauled the fuel distributor, as it's called, the metering head that actually distributes the fuel to the cylinders. We've got 6 new injectors, put those on. Corey's done a lovely job of bringing this back to life. I've adjusted the relationship between the cold system pressure and the warm system pressure, which is very important. So it actually picks up reasonably from cold. You don't want it to be absolutely amazing, otherwise somebody who just jumps in and drives it could actually end up revving the engine too high when it's cold. But so we've done a lot of work on this car. I had to feature it in the video. And of course, then there is the elephant in the room, Back to the Future. but we don't have any crass references or anything like that here. This is a serious workshop. We do serious work. We don't indulge in silly theatrical gags. So what we're going to do now is take the car for a run. And well, actually, I've never driven a DeLorean. This is a first for me. I'll be really interested to see how this car drives. Well, this is a most interesting experience. The other car I've been road testing today is a Lamborghini Miura. I mean, you know, they both got 2 seats, they both got 4 wheels, they both got V-formation engines. You know, the similarities are endless. But I'm just sort of quietly getting used to this car. I have never driven a DeLorean in my life. This is the very, very first experience of it. And it just feels so incredibly late 70s, early 80s. The gear change is lovely, actually. It's the, I think this gearbox is the Renault gearbox that they used in the GTA. And it just feels very sweet. The synchro is smooth. The gear change is actually sort of, you know, fingertip precise. It's great. I'm just gently letting everything warm up. It's a perfect balmy sunny afternoon for my first trip in a DeLorean. And the engine was running pretty abysmally before, but it's as smooth as silk now, actually. Once it's running, they don't idle particularly smoothly because of the offset, the non-offset crank pins, the 120-degree spacing between the big end journals on the crank. But you know what? It's not that bad. It really isn't. It's never going to be a Lamborghini Miura, but it wasn't trying to be. What is a classic car? It's a car that brings a smile to your face when you drive it. And this feels it feels quite well sorted, actually. Very much of its era. I'm surrounded by crunchy plastic, as I call it. I don't expect to be driving this car on the door handles around the Nürburgring, although just in case I do, there is a nice little slot in the top of the steering wheel to tell me where the straight ahead position is when I'm drifting it at 100 miles an hour around the Nordschleife. But I suspect it's actually far better being a manual car than an automatic, this. I rather suspect that that V6 engine is far better suited to a manual box. And as I say, it's no hardship to use. It's not bad at all, really. Everything's up to speed. Everything's up to pressure. Here we go. It's okay. You know, it's actually perfectly usable, this. It's not the most roomy cabin in the world with these great big doors, which are actually quite thick, but it's actually good fun, this. It's better than I was expecting it to be, and I'm not just being polite to DeLorean owners the world over, but it could be a lot worse. It really could. The turn-in is not bad. It doesn't particularly roll. The steering at least feels real, which is more than can be said for a lot of modern cars. This is okay. It's never going to be absolutely phenomenal, but it wasn't meant to be. You can tell that Lotus has been at work on this car. The chassis actually is far better than I was expecting it to be. The handling, etc. It is quite firm, but there again, so is a Lotus Esprit. It's not actually that bad. And the thing about the V6 is it may not be the most stunning engine in the world power delivery wise, but the power curve is smooth and linear. There are no humps or bumps in it. It's pretty, it's all right. The whole package sort of works. It's got new tyres on it, which I'm sure help it a lot. We've just fitted a new set of tyres to it. if you compare it to a sort of American car of the era, I think it probably handles at least as well. I'm thinking of the Pontiac Fiero, which I never liked, I have to say. Yeah, it's shock of all shocks. It's not that bad. The other thing to bear in mind is late 70s, early 80s catalyzed cars, which this is, tended to be very, very poor on performance because they had to detune the engines so much, car manufacturers, to actually work with the catalyst in terms of catalysts don't like rich mixtures or that kind of thing. The engine has to be set up sympathetically towards the catalyst, and that is nothing to do with power. It's all to do with exhaust emissions. And manufacturers hadn't yet brought in 4 valves per cylinder technology to help compensate for the lack of power. So this is sort of in a hiatus period of the 1970s and early 80s where car manufacturers were really struggling. It took Ferrari, I think the injection cars came out in 1979, the 400i, the 308 GTBi, even the Boxer, the 512 BBI, round about 1979, 1980. And it took them a couple of years. Ferrari, they lost power quite a lot because of the emissions equipment that was on the engines and the fact that they had to detune them. And therefore, then in 1982, that Ferrari introduced 4 valves per cylinder, and at least in the 308 series, not in the Boxer or any of the others. But so consequently, late 1970s, early 80s of any make and model were largely hampered by the catalyst, really. So I can berate this and say, oh, it's the power delivery's flaccid and all the rest of it, but actually it's not that bad. This car could have been a lot worse. Okay, I'm just going to try pushing it through this bend a bit. Let's see what it feels like. Slow in. You know what? You can actually get some feedback and some this car sort of, you know, it speaks to you a bit. The chassis is, I would say, very nicely set up on this car. It's never going to be a racing car, but as I keep saying, my flabber is well and truly gasted. I think this is I think this is okay, actually. I wouldn't put it on my top 20 list of cars, but I can see why people like them, and I can see why they're slowly appreciating in value. Yeah, you certainly do feel the road in it, but I suppose that's the trade-off, because it does have negligible body roll on the corners. Not as bad an effort as I thought it might be, considering the cynicism surrounding John DeLorean, and the fact that they didn't really sell the numbers that they were intending to sell or aspiring to sell. But yeah, it's quite stable as well, actually. It doesn't tramline particularly. It goes where you point it. The steering's sharp. Yeah, not as bad as I thought, really. Shock, horror, amazement. I drive so many cars that disappoint me. I'm trying to think of cars over the years that have disappointed me, and other cars that are wonderful. The BMW M1, I think, is a fantastic bit of kit. The first time I drove one of those, I was shocked at what a lovely car it was to drive fast. And I'm trying to think of cars that have disappointed me. Probably a Lotus Elan +2, 2+2. I've never really driven a nice one of those. I'm sure they exist. Yeah, who would have thought it? Iain actually could see himself driving a DeLorean from A to B. I am amazed.
So here we are, sauntering along. What's this character doing? What's he doing? Oh, I think he's filming a lift. Who is it? Strange looking man.
Where are we going now?
Back to the future.
Where?
What can possibly go wrong?
Everything!
I'm a scientist.
A scientist. You're a doctor of scientism. Good.
Well, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, but whether I'm a doctor or scientist, I don't know. I went back to the past one time.
Really?
I'm now going up to the future.
Oh, okay.
See if it's any better.
Yeah, this is tame then, really, driving down the country road in a DeLorean. What can possibly go wrong?
Anything. Everything and anything. In this day and age, how fast are you going to go?
Well, that's a very good question. I believe there's a critical speed on these, but I can't just remember what it is.
Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be back with something else very soon.